welcome back. Sorry for the bad audio, I don't have my regular setup. I'm sort of on the move at the moment, which is why this episode is going to be a bit strange. A quick update before the news. Game Vulture has been on hiatus since semester ended, but things are going to pick up again as we enter the new year. I'll be keeping up with the recap, and we have some new content lined up for 2026, including game reviews, the return of our podcast, and more videos where we go to local events and talk to game developers. But anyway, a few things have happened recently in the gaming space that I want to talk about, so let's get into it. So Halifax Studios shut down. It was owned by Ubisoft, and it stirred up a bit of controversy. For context, Halifax Studio was the developer of the mobile game Assassin's Creed Rebellion, which is a thing, as well as Rainbow Six Mobile. The company was acquired in 2015 by Ubisoft, changing its name from Untitled Studios to Ubisoft Halifax. Ubisoft claims its closure was due to cost-saving efforts, since Ubisoft hasn't been doing well lately, but there's a bit of controversy because the closure of Halifax comes just 3 weeks after 61 of its 71 staff decided to unionize. There could be some speculation that its closure was due to the unionization, but it's either or at this point. We haven't heard from anyone working at Halifax yet, since they seem to be keeping quiet, so it's a bit up in the air at the moment. Revenue from their mobile games seem to be declining. I think some of the suspicion comes from a recent case where Unknown Worlds, the developers of Subnautica, made a legal complaint against Crafton Inc., accusing the parent company of delaying Subnautica 2 as an attempt to avoid paying the developers a $250 million USD payout tied to its 2025 early access release. So it's not unknown for companies to engage in suppression tactics of its subsidiaries. It does seem like the wheels were rolling before the unionization happens, but the timing is a bit too convenient. We'll see what new developments arise, and hopefully someone from the Halifax team decides to get vocal. So the Xbox Developer Showcase happens this Friday on the 23rd, or the 22nd in the US. There were 3 big showcases that happened, which included the new Forza game set in Japan, an extended look at the new Fable game, and also a look at the new game from Game Freak. So this game's called Beast of Reincarnation, and to me this was the biggest announcement. A while back we got a first look at the game, and it's very much in the vein of AAA action RPG, similar to something like Black Myth Wukong and Sekiro, set in a post-apocalyptic world ruined by some sort of corruption. You play as Emma, who has a dog companion named Koto, as they travel the world and battle monsters and bosses. The game will be directed by Game Freak's Kota Furushima, who works on the battle system for Pokemon, and is set to release sometime this year. In other news, Code Violet by Team Kill Media was released recently. It got some eyes on it due to it apparently being inspired by the Dark Crisis, but the reviews are pretty terrible. Its bad reviews were honestly kind of expected, just from what we saw leading up to its release. It seemed fairly low quality, and is published by a developer that no one's really heard of before. Not only that, but as typical of games journalists, they don't like the game because it features a pretty female protagonist. By modern standards, it's considered taboo by mainstream journalists for a game to have a pretty female character. Any game that comes out that doesn't feature a masculinized or androgynous female character is scrutinized by games journalists, so like Stellar Blade, Marvel Rivals. But that's not where the main controversy comes from. Prior to its release, Team Kill Media made a statement about not wanting the game to release on PC because they didn't want modders to alter the game. Because of that, it only released on PS5. It kind of left a few people scratching their heads. Why would you inhibit the sales of your own game just because of modders? This type of policing seems really bizarre to me. They did make another statement on Twitter saying they don't care about critic reviews, and that they only care about what their paying customers think of their game. Well, the customers don't seem to like it either, and their earlier statements about not wanting people to mod the game has apparently left a bad taste. Anyway, their game bombed, and they inhibited the profits of their sales for a petty reason. I can only assume they got what they wanted. But speaking of cult classic-inspired games, the demo for Parasite Mutant was released recently. This game is heavily inspired by Parasite Eve, so if you want to check it out, the demo is free on Steam. But anyway, the minimum specs for the new 007 First Light game were released to the official Twitter account. There was some confusion here with the supposed PC requirements because there were some inconsistencies. I'm not a tech expert, so I'll just have to rely on what other people are saying. So the original image said that you need 1080p at 60 FPS with at least 32GB of RAM and a GPU with 12GB of VRAM. So one of the recommended GPUs was a NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3060 Ti, which only has 8GB of VRAM, which wasn't enough for the supposed game specs, but IOI, which are the developers of the game, has since corrected that mistake. We are providing today an update to the PC system requirements for 007 First Light. The recommended RAM has been corrected from 32GB to 16GB. VRAM values have been updated, and the minimum CPU line has been fixed, and the VRAM has gone down from 12GB to 8GB. All of this is very confusing to the layman, so I'm not really sure what's going on here. I think this is a good example of why proper PR and proper communication is important, because most people don't know what any of this stuff means. Not only that, but it took over a week for the devs to respond and amend the specs, and of course the game itself is embroiled in culture war due to the devs modernizing the game, because of course. But anyway, let's move on to our last bit of news. Best for last, just like the Game Awards, Highguard releases on the 26th. And not a single thing has been heard from the developers. For context, Highguard is a hero shooter in the same vein as Overwatch and Marvel Rivals, made by the same people that made Apex Legends and Titanfall. It was announced at last year's Game Awards and was the last announcement of the show. It was hyped up since the last announcement is usually reserved for like special or big announcements, but this announcement fell completely flat because of the game's bland design and generic looking characters, and people seem completely disinterested. Not only that, it was discovered that some of the devs that worked on Concord are also working on this game, and Concord was a spectacular fail, closing down after only 2 weeks of releasing for pretty much the same reasons that people aren't interested in Highguard. And since its announcement at the Game Awards, nothing has been heard from the devs. No more trailers, no PR, no responses from the devs on Twitter, just radio silence. The only thing we've heard from the press are articles about how there is no news about Highguard, and apparently the Highguard developers didn't pay for their spots in the Game Awards, which raised a lot of eyebrows and made people question why this trailer was reserved for last. So Paul Tassi from Forbes wrote an article about this, and there was also another article by Simon Tardy from IGN titled, "Can we please stop dunking on Highguard before it's even out, please?" To which Paul Tassi replies, "What it showed did not look good, and it has shown nothing else since, so what are we supposed to make of it?" Which is a fair point. And this sort of negative press is the only press it's really getting, and the only people really acknowledging that it's coming out on the 26th is Jeff Keighley himself, who's made posts to Twitter. But yeah, people just don't seem interested, and the developers don't seem interested in their own game as well. And from what I've seen, and from the reaction, I don't blame them. I think that the other reason why this game will flop is because, like Concord, the trailer and presentation looked high spec. Most people don't have expensive PC setups, and with PCs becoming more expensive with the rising costs of tech, I can only assume that if a game looks too high spec, then most people simply aren't going to bother trying out the game, especially if there are lower spec, more established games that they're familiar with. A lot of people that play hero shooters play to climb in rank. It's one of the biggest drivers of a competitive game retaining a player base. People simply aren't going to want to put that established, active, and reasonably new game, in the case of Marvel Rivals, aside, in favor of something that already has such negative press surrounding it. I think accessibility and rapport among the current fan base of a game is why indie games are doing so well, and the fact they're usually low spec means that tech concerns aren't a worry for most people, but that's just my 2 cents. Anyway, that's all for today. Until next time.